Hey guys, today we're looking at a video that discusses creationism and evolution. I'm joined by Hi I Think I'm Real, who will be assisting me.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me on your channel, Stick. I can't wait to get started.
This is the second part of a two-part series. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, click the link in the description to go to Real's channel, but don't watch this part until you've watched part 1. So now that that's out of the way, let's get right into the video.
So you might be asking yourself right now, if all of the information presented in this video is true, then why on earth are all these people out there still clinging to Darwin's theory as a hardcore belief? And why on earth is this theory taught in our schools as if it were factual when it is indeed theoretical?
Theoretical, so something that has mountains upon mountains of evidence and over a century of research is theoretical? I don't think you really understand the entire field of evolution and what we know about it, otherwise you wouldn't be a young earth creationist, but let's hear what you have to say.
But before we let our unfortunate creationist friend speak, Stick, it should be made abundantly clear that the word theory means something completely different in a scientific context than it does in layman's terms. While the word might mean a guess or a hunch in regular conversation, in scientific terms it means an interpretation of verified facts. I really hope these creationists will finally understand this delineation someday.
Well, here's something that might blow your mind. If Charles Darwin were alive today, he would be asking the same questions. Huh? What are you saying, Johnny? I'm saying just this. If he were alive today, he would tell all of the students, teachers, and scientists alike who have held on to his theory and grabbed a hold of it as truth that they are wrong.
This isn't a new argument. I've heard plenty of young earth creationists trying to tell people that Darwin thought he was wrong or whatnot, but that's simply not the case.
I'm actually a little bit embarrassed for our unfortunate creationist friend here, Stick. He is so eagerly, so proudly parroting falsehoods, and he doesn't even know it.
Not just embarrassed, I actually feel bad for him. Just kidding, I don't.
But before Charles Darwin did that, he would first tell you that you were wrong because he was wrong. In fact, in the very book from whence the evolutionary theory came, Darwin made a very important statement in light of his observations and proposed theories. Darwin said this: if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Such an organ as Darwin described here would be known as an irreducibly complex system.
You said here that Darwin himself would have said he was wrong. He stated what condition would have had to be met for his theory to be proven false, which is completely different than him just saying he's wrong. The argument of irreducible complexity was introduced by many people such as Michael Behe after the time of Darwin. So immediately, without even making your argument, you've already told a lie, but let's not hold that against you.
Now, Stick and I will get into irreducible complexity in a second, viewer, but I want to let it be known that if there were truly any merit to our unfortunate creationist friend's suggestions, then it would shake the scientific world to its core. More surprising than that is the fact that such a dramatic discovery would be welcomed. If it could be truly demonstrated that the theory of evolution was wrong, then the scientific world would be ecstatic because it's about truth, not pride. Alright, Jesus bro, hit us with your best shot.
This is a single system which is composed of several interacting parts that all contribute to the basic function of the system. And if you were to remove any one of these parts, the system would effectively cease to function.
And this, my friends, has been disproven over and over again. Evolutionary systems may appear to be irreducibly complex at first, which is why it's so good at appealing to the uneducated person. But upon further studies, this idea is completely false. The viewpoint generated by the idea of irreducible complexity would involve extremely linear thinking. To understand how proper evolution occurred, you must be able to think of the system as a whole and how each component evolved together, and how the organ function was not necessarily the way we know it today until evolutionary pressure was acted upon it. If there is more than one feature that appear to be critical to the function of the system, there's no reason to believe they couldn't have evolved together. In addition, one of these features may not have had the exact same function as it did in the past, indicating that the system could have had operated in a completely different way until the second feature was introduced to make the system more effective. To think in proper evolutionary terms is to be able to think in a non-linear fashion and expect any dynamic possibility to be likely. In addition, scientists have been able to show the development of certain supposedly irreducibly complex organs through computer simulations, which demonstrated that these features are able to develop through natural processes.
See, when I hear creationists bring up irreducible complexity, I have to laugh. It's like playing chess with a child and seeing their face light up when they think they've checkmated your king, but they haven't yet realized that you'd won the game 3 moves back. Now, our unfortunate creationist friend is about to explain why irreducible complexity is the ace that creationists have been looking for. But know this, you aren't about to hear anything you haven't heard before. This is essentially a repackaging of an already tired rhetoric. That is, a creationist pointing at a complex organic structure and shouting, that simply could not have been formed by chance, which is nothing new.
So to help illustrate this, we'll use a bicycle and a mousetrap, okay? A bicycle is a complex system, but it is not an irreducibly complex system. Meaning that I could remove major components of the bicycle and it would still function as a vehicle of expedited transportation. For instance, if I remove the seats, I can still stand up and ride. If I remove the front wheel, I can still wheelie on the rear wheel. If I remove the whole front portion of the bike, meaning the forks, the wheel, the handlebar, and all, I've effectively turned it into a unicycle. Yet it still functions as a vehicle of expedited transportation. Thus, it is not an irreducibly complex system.
I don't like this analogy because each part of the bicycle has a static function. If you take away the other parts of the bicycle, each part is not flexible and can only do what they were designed to do. But that's simply not the case in evolution. We're talking about biological systems here which can evolve, change, and adapt to situations. Certain features don't necessarily have to stick to the same functions for millions of years. In addition, many systems or organs were actually formed due to the decrease in complexity over time. To be specific, they developed into a very complex system, and then due to evolutionary pressure that favors simpler systems of identical function, the system collapsed back into its most simple state. This is another example of being able to think in more than just a linear pathway, but this simply cannot be done in the analogy of a bicycle.
A mousetrap, on the other hand, is an irreducibly complex system. It's made up of 5 components, all of which are required in order for it to perform its function. Component number 1 is the catch. This is where you place your bait, and this is also what triggers the trap to activate. Component number 2 is a thin U-shaped rod called the hammer. Component number 3 is a torsion spring. It provides the speed force with which to bring down the hammer. Component number 4 is the holding bar, which keeps the hammer cocked back in place. And component number 5 is the platform on which the entire system is mounted. If you remove any one of these components, the system will not function. Or put another way, the complexity of the mousetrap does not allow for a reduction in parts while maintaining its function. Thus, it is an irreducibly complex system. All the components must be present simultaneously in order to function.
The use of simple analogies makes this concept all the more deceiving. Sure, it seems like a mousetrap couldn't be reduced any further in terms of its complexity, but that's because we built it that way. We created it to be as simple as possible so we could build it with the least amount of cost and resource. And the mousetrap is a horrible comparison to complex biological systems. A better analogy would be a cat. A cat can effectively be seen as a mousetrap. Can a cat be reduced further and still maintain its function to capture and kill mice? Yes, of course. It could lose an ear. It could lose its fur. Heck, it could even lose a leg. The fact that you chose a mousetrap here is completely dishonest, and there's no reason to think a mousetrap is even a good analogy for complex biological systems.
So now that we understand what irreducible complexity is, given our advances in microbiology and the study of single-celled organisms, we are now privy to much more information than Darwin had back in the mid-1800s when he published his theory.
Yes, of course we have more information than Darwin when he first published his theory, but here's the thing, no one is claiming that Darwin is the absolute authority when it comes to evolution. Since Darwin's times, we have come a long way, discovering new things every year. It doesn't matter what Darwin thinks or even says about evolution. Even if we revive Darwin and he said that his own theory of evolution is false, it still wouldn't be false, because it is the progress of thousands and thousands of other scientists who really took a look at the seed Darwin planted and grew it into a full tree of evolution.
This is what creationists often misunderstand about the scientific community. In the mind of the creationist, the teachings of long-dead ancient men are held as sacred. They then project that line of thinking onto the scientifically literate individual, thinking that people like Stick, myself, and you, viewer, somehow revere Newton and Faraday and Darwin, along with their scientific contributions, but this simply isn't true. The hypothesis is what matters to the scientific community, not the individual who presents it. In addition, the scientific community will ravenously scrutinize a hypothesis, no matter who is presenting it, because the pursuit is for truth, not reverence or worship.
And what have we uncovered since then? We've uncovered the evidence of biomolecular machines. Inside large organisms are a series of organs that perform specific functions. All of the tissues making up these organs, as well as the organism itself, is comprised of microscopic cells. Interestingly enough, these small cells contain organs and components as well. So there's organic complexity even down to the cellular level. So let's look at just one component of a single-celled organism. And since we talked about transportation earlier, let's look at the flagellum. The flagellum is a hair-like, or rather a tail-like appendage that's used to propel the cell through a given body of space. It is essentially an outboard motor, much like what you'd find on a motorboat. First, you have the propeller, which on the flagellum is called the filament. Next, you have the U-joint, which is called the hook. You have the drive shaft or rod, and you have a stator and a rotor. There's roughly 40 different protein parts needed to comprise the 5 main components making up the flagellum. And the only way for the flagellum to work is for all 5 components to be in place simultaneously. An outboard motor cannot gradually just develop in a single-cell organism out of nowhere. The evidence of these irreducibly complex biomolecular machines are what Darwin pondered on when he was discussing what type of finding would result in debunking his theory. Remember what he said? He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. So there you have it. The man Darwin himself would consider his own theory discredited in light of recent discovery.
Ah, the flagellum. The ace in the hole for the creationists. Here is the irreducibly complex biochemical machine that completely tarnishes the theory of evolution, a scientific theory which had stood fast against the test of time and endless scrutiny for over a century and a half until now. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the titan of Darwinism has been toppled by a single noodly appendage, except that it hasn't. You see, there exists this little thing called the Type 3 Secretory Apparatus, or the TTSS. The 12-year-old boy watching this is welcome to call it the titty asses, just don't say it in front of your parents. Now, the Type 3 Secretory Apparatus is a protein system that allows pathogens to directly inject infectious molecules into the cell that it is attacking. So what does this have to do with the flagellum or irreducible complexity? You see, the TTSS is comprised of protein molecules which are directly related to the base segment of the bacterial flagellum, and only the base segment. Speaking bluntly, this means that the Type 3 secretory apparatus has a biological function despite the fact that it is comprised of a small component of the flagellum. If the flagellum were truly irreducibly complex, then the TTSS could not function, yet it does. So, my unfortunate creationist friend, you can take your irreducible complexity argument and shove it.
And even if you tried to somehow salvage Darwin's theory of evolution, you'd still have the question of information. Where did the engineering information required to construct an outboard motor on a cellular level come from? Where did it come from? And if all life on this planet could somehow be traced back to a single cell, you would still have the question of what or who gave that cell life? Because as science shows, all life on this planet can only be created from a living organism.
Let's not repeat ourselves with all this jargon about biogenesis. Let's instead focus on the question of information. Where did it come from? That is not the concern of the theory of evolution, and it also isn't a problem for the scientific community. Just because that question is currently an unknown does not mean that it will remain that way. You are operating from a position of ignorance and using that platform as a launching pad to arrive at your Bronze Age creation myth. Worse, you and many others like you are peddling misinformation. That's why Professor Stick and I do what we do.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. I couldn't have handled this video on my own, so I'm glad you were here to help me out.
Hi, I think I'm real. Thank you, Professor Stick, for having me on. This collaboration was enlightening, challenging, and a hell of a lot of fun. And many thanks to your viewers for watching.
And if you still haven't watched part 1, then it's time to head over to Real's channel where you can watch more of us tearing apart this creationist. As always, the link will be in the description. And while you're there, feel free to check out his other content and drop a subscription if you like what you see. Real's channel is focused a lot on topics relating to social justice warriors and politics, so if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. And with that, we're off. Bye.